We're back. This is The Final Word, India, England daily after the third T20 International. I'm Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon, the other bloke on the screen. He'll tell you all about it in 30 seconds.
Easy done. It was all about the power play again. India couldn't get anything going. 24 for 3 in the power play. Then Rishabh Pant got run out. Virat Kohli managed to turn on a masterful innings, made 77 in quick time, but that only got them to 156. England chased it with relative ease. Jos Buttler 83 not out and made it look pretty easy with a calculated attack during the power play of their own. England 2-1.
You've made that look relatively easy as well. And that was a calculated 30-second summary. Beautifully done. Yes, so England have won the toss twice. India have won the toss once, and that reflects the scoreline. We might start there, actually, because that seems to be the major talking point out of the game so far, that it has been, for whatever reason, this time of year, it's been especially slippery deeper into the game, which means that if you win the toss and get a chance to bowl first, that it's certainly at your advantage batting second. I mean, but I can't really see a way around that. A flip of a coin's a flip of a coin.
Yeah, and also if you want to play the games in the evening so that people can watch them in the evening, then the conditions that you'll get in the evening will come into play. You know, maybe they have to start playing them later. Play them at 9 p.m. onwards or something and finish at 2 in the morning so that everybody has the same dewy conditions to deal with. But, you know, it didn't stop India's spinners from turning the ball a bit. Yuzvendra Chahal ripped a couple of deliveries. Washington Sundar landed a couple that were decent as well in terms of purchase, so it wasn't impossible to bowl out there. Yeah,
interesting that Dinesh Karthik on the Sky Cricket commentary said that there might be a way to make the ground more slippery before the first innings, just to level things up a little bit. Unlikely that anything like this would ever be entered into, but I like the way that he's thinking. He's done a fantastic job on the coverage so far, I should say. But Geoff, you're spot on about the power play. For the second time in 3 games, England were able to blast India out, taking 3 wickets in the first 6 overs after winning the toss and bowling. And for the second time in the series, it was Mark Wood bowling at extreme pace and hitting those stumps. And I mean, it's not exactly a revelation that Mark Wood's a fantastic short form bowler, but I mean, what a brilliant cricketer to add to the mix in a World Cup year.
Well, also the fact that he missed that second game and his absence was very noticeable in the way that India took down England's pace attack, but the way that he started scorched through KL Rahul, his third failure on the trot, shattered his stumps, and then it was bounce as much as pace that did Rohit Sharma in. He was just trying to work one around the corner across the line and got a top edge away to Jofra Archer on the leg side, but it was, you know, the pace that went through KL and the bounce that did in Rohit Sharma, and, you know, then came back later on in the match to get rid of Shreyas Iyer as well. So Mark Wood's having a fantastic time for a bowler who's missed so much cricket injured. You know, it's nice to see him actually being able to have an impact on a match immediately as soon as he came into the series in Game 1 and then again in Game 3. And that just got things started off on the wrong track for India. And there is that tinkering going on. So Ishan Kishan couldn't be dropped after batting so well in the second game, but got pushed down to number 3 so that Rohit Sharma could come back into the side. KL Rahul there as well. You'd imagine that KL's likely to miss out for the 4th game so that Surya Kumar Yadav can come back in, because he debuted in Game 2 but didn't get to bat.
Yeah, it didn't look balanced, did it? I mean, Rohit Sharma has to come back into the team and would set him up well, the cloth one around the corner. But you look at their power play in totality and you compare it to Game 2 where they were outstanding. In Game 3, I mean, they had 25 dot balls in the first 6 overs. According to CricViz, it was one of their slowest starts in terms of aggressive shots they played or attempted to play in the history of T20 internationals. And I appreciate that Rohit Sharma must come back, but KL Rahul, the senior man, was retained. They tried to get clever by putting Kishan down to number 3, but with the benefit of hindsight, Ishan Kishan, who can clearly hit the ball so nicely in that power play, he must return to the top of the list and sort of play to their new strength.
Well, you know, that's why he was brought into the team, because of what he's done at the top of the order, and so there's probably not much point trying to shoehorn him into a different position. But in terms of what it means for who's going to get picked at the World Cup, I don't think there's much influence really, because there's the whole IPL to go between now and then, where any of the players who are out of nick will be able to have the time to work their way back into runs or confirm the fact that they're not playing well and probably consign themselves to their fate. But it was interesting that the game wasn't entirely gone probably until Rishabh Pant got run out. Now, that was a humorous misunderstanding, I suppose, because he'd hustled a second run and overshot the crease by about 15 metres. And then there was the chance to get an overthrow. And Virat Kohli he'd come about a third of the way down the wicket and was waiting to see if Rishabh Pant would respond for a run. And Rishabh just should have said no, but he looked up and saw Kohli coming part of the way down the wicket and just took off for it, just went for it, and was nowhere near it because it was, you need to run 22 yards for a run in cricket, but he was running about 35 yards and ended up falling just short. And so that cost them another 3 cheap overs or so, and it also cost them, I noticed later in the game, that Kohli was turning down singles or second runs that he would normally take. It had got into his head that he was worried about another run out, and so they didn't really get going until the 15th over when Kohli was batting with Hardik Pandya, and it was only those last 5 overs where they really went for it, although when they went for it, they absolutely went for it.
Yeah, gosh, it was an incredible display from Kohli, considering he was 28 from 29 balls, I think it was. Mm-hmm. He struck his last 50 runs in the space of 18 deliveries. That partnership with Hardik Pandya was worth 70 in 35 balls, but Pandya was playing second fiddle. It was all about Kohli. And Geoff, at his best, he's so resourceful in the crease. He's so intuitive. He seems to almost telepathic. He knows where the ball's going to be bowled, and he uses the crease to his advantage one way and the other. And he did that so nicely against all of England's death bowlers, including Mark Wood, who he took 17 from, almost all on his own at the very end of the India innings. So Kohli, having got back into form in the second T20, was at his absolute best as he went through the gears and took England down and made sure that after that calamitous start, they had something reasonable to bowl to.
Yeah, and I think, I want to look at that Kohli innings a bit because there tend to be 2 ways that people talk about Kohli. Either they get very jaded about the fact that he's so good and don't really give him credit for it, and nitpick and criticise, or they hero worship him and say that he's the god of cricket and the shining sun that lights up the entire cricketing world and all the rest of it, without actually looking at what he does that works and what is so good. And what stood out was he had a moment of fortune early where he tried to flick Archer to the leg side and got the edge of the bat over his own head and over the keeper for 6. But the way that he went at the bowling in the next couple of overs against Chris Jordan, the wristy pickup shot over deep backward square for 6, and then hanging back to a slower ball that, a lot of players, in terms of placement, where they're trying to beat the fielders, a lot of players just play the shot and hope for the best. They play the pull shot and they hope they hit the gap or whatever it was. Kohli had a deep mid-wicket and a long on, and he waited back for this slower ball and hit it so precisely between those two. He was absolutely aiming for that boundary spot. There was nothing to do with good fortune. And then the way that he took on Mark Wood was astonishing. So earlier in the night, in the power play, just after Rohit had got out, Kohli played a perfect cover drive against Mark Wood for 4, so even when they were in that power play, Mark Wood's bowling at 147 to 152 Ks, absolutely flogging it down, and Kohli walks across outside off stump, almost off the cut strip, and pulls a flat 6, which is absurd on its own, and then stays put completely and drives over long off for 6. And that was, you talk about players clearing the front leg, he didn't move his front foot out. He just kind of bows his front leg, bends it out of the way a little bit to give himself the clearance to get through that shot and power it down the ground. I just thought it was an extraordinary innings. And to put together 77 in such quick time after such a slow start, it gave them something to work with. Yeah,
and I suppose when he goes up the gears, we're thinking as spectators or as viewers, the pitch is very hard. And that's why, in the absence of pace, you had to get resourceful, and really nobody does it better. That's well summed up. But ball's coming at his head at 150 clicks, to have the presence of mind and I guess the nimble hips as well to move from side to side. It is really something special. And we've barely touched on Jos Buttler yet, but that's where the game was blown really out of the water. So a target of 157 on a tacky pitch can be difficult. We saw in the World T20 of 2016 that was the case from time to time. But I know it's a long time ago and the game's moved on, but runs on the board are runs on the board nevertheless. And Buttler played with such freedom inside that power play, knocking 43 from 17 balls in that opening stanza, that from there it was a matter of it was a calculated effort. So from that point forward, Buttler struck 20 from his next 20 balls, and it didn't matter a jot because the hard work had been done. They'd broken the back of the chase inside the power play, just as they had in the first T20 win back on Friday.
Well, it was the inverse of the Kohli innings, really. Kohli 49 off his last 17 balls after that slow start. Buttler explodes early, which puts them so far ahead of the chase that he's able to just work the ball around it, pretty much a runner ball through most of the rest of the chase and end up not out. But it was interesting in that power play because Bhuvneshwar Kumar and Shardul Thakur bowled the first 3 overs and bowled really nicely. They were getting swing. Bhuvi was getting the in-swinger working. It was hard to get them away. And then Yuzvendra Chahal comes on to bowl the 4th over. Now, Kohli's used Washington in the power play a fair bit recently, using a spinner up front. But he goes to his leg spinner, the bowler who's turning the ball away from the right-hander. And presumably the gamble was that Chahal's got a pretty good record against Buttler in terms of not being easy to smash. But has he been bowling to him in the power play in the IPL? I'm not too sure about that. And Buttler just lined him up. He basically decided that if this was what India were going to do, he had to attack this bowler. Came down the wicket, hit the first ball down the ground for 6. Chahal comes back to get Jason Roy out in the same over, caught off the reverse sweep. But Buttler charges from the last ball of the over and hits that for 6 as well. So even though it was a wicket taking over, it was still a really expensive one, and it was still one that hurt India. And then Kohli goes back to Chahal for the 6th over. Now that seemed an insane move, given that the 6th over of the power play is so often the most expensive, to a bowler who's not so accustomed to bowling with the field up like that, and couldn't have any leg side protection, and he got looted again. Yeah,
it felt almost like it was an experimentative move from
absolutely.
Kohli. Like it was like, oh, well, let's see how this plays if I double down, and whether it can buy him a wicket. But by that point, Buttler was going so well, as you say, that he was able to let the good times roll. How's this for a stat? Kohli and Buttler between them struck 160 unbeaten runs, essentially, in 98 deliveries. Everybody else in the game, 137 from 132. So it really does show those two being a cut above through the course of the game. David Malan didn't do an awful lot wrong, Geoff, as far as going at his sort of standard strike rate of about 100, which is what he normally does in the early stages of an innings. But the fact that in consecutive games he's been out at that stage means that the debate will be around him. Andrew Miller on Crick Info made the point that if the debate is around a player who averages 50, you're probably going pretty well. Yep. And if the other debate that England have got at the moment is, well, should Buttler open or should he come down the list as a middle order player or indeed as a finisher? They've got good questions to answer in that England batting lineup at the moment, especially when you throw in there that Johnny Bairstow's having a good series as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. That if that's where the scrutiny is, David Malan's got out a couple of times after getting himself set, but that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. In T20 cricket, putting too much weight on dismissals, you need a pretty large sample size before it starts to be meaningful. So, he's in there more to do a job if things go wrong, I imagine, and if he stays for long enough, he can score so quickly. But I think after he's faced about 30 deliveries, his strike rate goes up past 190, so he can become hugely destructive later in the show. And an interesting thing that I noticed was there were actually points where I thought Jos Buttler wasn't aggressive enough, if that makes sense. So that 6th over I mentioned by Chahal, Buttler reverse sweeps a boundary, and then he takes a single, and he's got Malan who's just come in at the other end who plays a dot ball and a single away. And I thought, if you've lined up a bowler like this and you've clobbered him for a couple of 6s in the 4th over, why would you be giving up strike? Why would you be working one? And that was there was a point where I wanted Buttler to be a bit more ruthless and say, I'm going to stay here and take this guy down. And it was not dissimilar towards the end, where he could have made himself a century, but he wasn't really interested in doing so once he was up around 80. And in the end, he had Johnny Bairstow facing, I think, 12 of the last 14 balls and hitting a few boundaries on the way and making sure the 100 couldn't happen. So, again, I wouldn't have minded seeing Buttler be a bit more greedy and say, look, give me the strike and I will hit a few out of the ground and get myself 3 figures.
Yeah, Bairstow finished with an unbeaten 40 from 28 deliveries with 5 boundaries. Buttler, 83 from 52 balls, 5 4s and 4 6s. It seems remarkable, Geoff, that Buttler has never made a T20 century.
Neither has Kohli,
when you consider... neither is Kohli, but I think for Buttler, it doesn't even extend to domestic cricket. The point here is that he's often played a role in a team, which has meant that he's been coming in late. But as he's been reinvented, I suppose, as an opener in the last couple of IPLs, certainly in 2018, which he used as a platform back to the England Test team, weirdly enough, and now as that opener. So I suppose when you look at the way that he batted to take Australia down in the second T20 at the Rose Bowl last year, and the way that he batted last night, it's hard to mount the counter view that Buttler should come in down the list when he gets that blank piece of paper with 120 deliveries. He's going to, I'd imagine, on balance, win more games opening than he will coming down the list. But again, it's a fantastic problem for England to have when he might very well be the best white ball player England's ever produced.
Yeah, and he might be the best finisher that they have at their disposal, and they don't have to use him there. That's something that they can work out. But as you say, if you've got a player who can, on a pretty regular basis, get 50 off 20 opening the batting, it's going to help you win an awful lot of games in this kind of format, that quality of start. Indeed it is.
Geoff, our player of the day, for mine, it's Mark Wood. The fact that he's played in 2 wins, taking wickets, bowling fast, just his general sort of energy in the field as well. There's a lot to like about the man from Durham who is fit and firing, as I mentioned off the top, at an important time, just as it was in 2019, building to that one-day World Cup. One of the big keys to that was that Wood was fit, and the fact that he's fit again in another World Cup year, that'll mean that Owen Morgan sleeps well at night.
I liked that selection from you because I'm sure Buttler got man of the match. I didn't check, but it always goes to a batsman. It always goes to whoever scored the most runs on the winning side. And that I love watching Kohli bat, and I thought that last night's innings was vintage from him. It was so thrilling to watch in terms of the class above that he is, the way that he can turn deliveries into deliveries they shouldn't be, and scoring opportunities they shouldn't offer. But Mark Wood was the one who set the tone for the match, and more than anybody decided the result, I reckon. So that's a fair call. What about the Hall of Fame? Final word, Hall of Fame. Any nominations from you for what caught your eye?
Yeah, I've got a slightly touching one. It comes back to Jos Buttler, but not for what he did on the field, but what he did before the game. Owen Morgan reached his 100th T20 international for England. He's the first man to reach that marker. A couple of women have done it for England, but no man. And Buttler addressed the team before the game, and he nearly brought the captain to tears, which I thought was a nice touch. I suppose it reinforces that Buttler may not be a man of many words, but when he does talk, it's worth listening to. And it had an effect on his captain who reached that milestone. And in that game, he didn't bat and he didn't bowl. Of course he didn't bowl, but he's had a thanks for coming in his milestone game, which I thought was also pretty funny.
Yeah, well, if you're not needed out there, then that's a pretty good game to be captaining. I liked the fact that when the 50 partnership came up between Kohli and Hardik Pandya, 51 runs, Hardik had made 10. How many times will you ever see that in the career of Hardik Pandya again?
Yes.
Because he just couldn't get one away, the poor fella.
Yeah, I doubt there are many times when he couldn't get one away. Geoff Lemon, Adam Collins.
One more though before.
Oh, you got another one. Sorry, I was about to give you the big wind up. Go again, Geoff.
No,
please.
this came. I'm not sure who it was on commentary, but when giving the wrap up at the end of the game, he said something along the lines of, Virat Kohli played well, got them to 156. Did they have enough runs? Possibly no. I'm like, they just lost, mate. They just no. You can be pretty categorical about the fact they did not have enough runs.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and a good place for us to end this edition of the India-England Final Word Daily. We'll be back for the 4th T20, of course, all the white ball games of this series with Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon. We'll talk to you in a couple of days.